In 1992, in the middle of a sold-out concert, Michael Jackson suddenly stopped the music, pointed toward the stage, and screamed at a woman in the front row. Security froze. The band froze. The audience went completely silent. Then Michael did the unthinkable. He ordered her to be removed from a venue. What that woman had done moments before would later leave his entire team shaken, and Michael himself unable to sleep for days. Why did he react so violently? What did he see that no one else noticed? And what truth about that night was hidden from the public for years? The world only saw the interruption. They never learned the real reason, until now. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Michael Jackson. Over 70,000 fans were screaming his name. The lights were blinding. The speakers thundered. Michael Jackson stood at the center of the stage, every movement electric, every note flawless. The show was perfect, until it wasn't. During the opening of Smooth Criminal, Michael suddenly faltered, not in the choreography, not in the vocals, in his eyes. His gaze locked onto something near the front of the stage. At first, the crowd thought it was part of the performance. Then Michael stopped singing. The music cut. Michael stepped forward, his face transformed, not angry, not dramatic, but terrified. He raised his hand and shouted, "Stop! Get her away from here." The stadium fell into chaos. Michael pointed directly at a woman in the front section. She was frozen, clutching her purse, eyes wide. Security hesitated. Michael screamed again, "Now!" Guards rushed forward. The woman began crying, screaming that she didn't do anything. The crowd booed. Some fans thought it was a joke. Others thought Michael was losing control. Michael wasn't looking at the crowd. He was staring at the woman's hands. And what he saw there made his heart pound in his chest. Because in that moment, Michael realized something was terribly, dangerously wrong. And what happened next would haunt everyone involved. The moment the woman was pulled from the front row, the stadium exploded into confusion. Fans were shouting. Security radios crackled. The band stood frozen, waiting for a cue that never came. Michael remained at the edge of the stage, breathing hard, his eyes locked on the spot where the woman had been standing just seconds earlier. "Clear the front section," he ordered, his voice low but shaking. The head of security rushed up the stairs to him. "Michael, what's going on?" Michael swallowed. She was signaling someone. "Signaling," the guard repeated. Michael nodded slowly, not waving, not cheering. It was the pattern. The guard frowned. A pattern of what? Michael's hands trembled as he gestured. I saw her do it twice. Then again. The same movement, same timing. She wasn't watching the show. She was watching the side of the stage. The guard's expression darkened. "What kind of movement?" he asked. Michael hesitated, then demonstrated with his own fingers, a subtle motion that looked meaningless to anyone else. The guard's face went pale. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Michael nodded. "My heart started racing the second I saw it." The guard spoke into his radio. "Lock down backstage. Check all access points." Meanwhile, the woman was being escorted to the tunnel under the stage. She was sobbing, repeating over and over, "I didn't do anything. He's crazy." Security did not answer her. One of the senior officers pulled her purse from her shoulder. "Ma'am, what's in the bag?" "Just my things." They opened it. Inside were normal items at first. Lipstick, phone, wallet, ticket stubs. Then the officer found the folded paper. Numbers, times, a rough sketch of the stage, and one line written at the bottom that made him stop breathing. He radioed immediately. "We have something." Back on stage, Michael paced in tight circles, his chest still tight. He had learned years earlier to trust the sudden feeling that hit him when something was wrong. It was the same feeling he used on stage, an instinct sharpened by fear, pressure, and survival. He turned to his longtime bodyguard, Bill Bray. "I couldn't ignore it," Michael whispered. "I just couldn't." Bill nodded. "You did the right thing." The guard returned, his face serious. "Michael, you need to come with us." They led him backstage, away from the crowd, into a quiet room. The paper was laid on the table. Michael stared at it. The numbers matched the exact times of lighting changes during the show. The sketch showed the side staircase and one of the crew entrances, and the line at the bottom said, "When the spotlight drops, move." Michael's knees nearly gave out. "I knew it," he whispered. The guard exhaled. "We don't know exactly what her intention was yet, but this was not harmless." The concert was canceled. The public never received a real explanation. Later that night, in a hotel room far above the city, Michael sat alone, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He hadn't yelled because he was angry. He had yelled because for one terrifying second, he had believed that night might be his last. And the thought of the 70,000 people screaming his name, completely unaware of the danger, would haunt him forever. Because Michael now understood something that few performers ever face. Sometimes, the stage is not the safest place in the world. Sometimes, it's the most dangerous. And the full truth of that night would only come out years later. The hotel room was too quiet. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, still in his stage clothes, the city lights of London blinking far below the window like nothing in the world had changed. His chest felt tight, as if the echo of the stadium's silence had followed him there. Bill Bray stood near the door, arms crossed. "They're questioning her now," he said. "Metropolitan Police, Counter-Terror Unit. They won't release anything yet." Michael nodded, but didn't look up. For the first time in years, he couldn't hear the music in his head. He could only see the woman's hands. That pattern, that timing, the way her eyes never once looked at him, only past him. He rubbed his temples. "I've seen that motion before," he whispered. Bill frowned. "Where?" Michael's voice dropped. "In Munich, 88, during the Bad Tour. A man near the barrier kept doing something similar. Security pulled him out before anything happened." Bill's expression tightened. "They never told you that." Michael finally looked up. "They didn't want to scare me." Bill's radio crackled. He turned away to listen, then looked back at Michael. "They found more in her coat," Bill said. "A disposable phone, burner type, and a second folded note." Michael stood. "What did it say?" Bill hesitated. "It listed your route after the show, from the tunnel to the armored van." Michael's breath caught. "How would she know that?" he asked. "Only someone with backstage access would," Bill said. Michael walked to the window and pressed his palm to the glass. "So it wasn't just her." Bill shook his head. "Doesn't look like it." Hours passed. The door finally opened, and a senior officer entered, his face drawn with fatigue. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "we can't discuss details yet, but you should know this was not a random disturbance. Your instinct likely prevented something very serious." Michael lowered himself back onto bed. "Is anyone else in danger?" he asked. The officer paused. "We're checking your entire team." Michael closed his eyes. He thought of the band, the dancers, the crew who had been laughing with him minutes before the music stopped. He whispered, "They trusted me." The officer nodded. "And you protected them." When the officer left, Michael finally let his guard slip. His hands shook. Bill sat across from him. "You okay?" Michael stared at the carpet. "I don't know how to go back on stage after this." Bill's voice softened. "You don't have to decide that tonight." But Michael wasn't thinking about tomorrow's show. He was thinking about how close the world had come to ending for him without ever knowing why. Near dawn, the phone rang. Bill answered, listened, then covered the receiver. "They want to talk to you again." At the police station, Michael sat across from two investigators. They slid a photograph across the table. It was the woman, younger than he remembered. Her eyes, empty of fear. They placed another image beside it. A grainy photo of a man near the stage tunnel. "Do you recognize him?" one investigator asked. Michael shook his head. They slid a third photo. Another man. Another angle. Then a fourth. Michael's stomach dropped. The fourth photo showed a stagehand he had spoken with earlier that afternoon. He helped with the lights. Michael said. The investigators exchanged a look. "We believe he passed the routing information," one said. Michael's voice was hollow. "Why me?" The investigator answered quietly. "Because You're Michael Jackson." They escorted him out through a back entrance. In the car, Michael stared at his reflection in the window and whispered, "I just wanted to sing." Bill put a hand on his shoulder. That night, Michael dreamed of the moment he'd pointed at the woman. In the dream, the crowd never stopped cheering. The music never cut, and the danger reached the stage. He woke with a start. The next morning, he canceled all public appearances. He sat with the band and crew in a closed room and told them only this: "I stopped the show because something felt wrong. I'm sorry, and I'm grateful you're all here." No one questioned him, but rumors began. The press claimed a breakdown, a tantrum, a publicity stunt. Michael didn't correct them. He couldn't explain that sometimes survival looks like chaos from the outside. Days later, the call came. "They've charged her," Bill said. "Conspiracy. She won't be out." Michael exhaled a breath he'd been holding since Wembley. He returned to the stage a week later. The crowd roared. But before the first note, Michael stood in the dark and whispered to himself, "Trust your heart," because he had learned something that night, something he would never forget. Sometimes the smallest instinct is the loudest warning. The days after Wembley felt unreal to Michael. Everywhere he went, the world looked the same: traffic, hotel lobbies, fans outside the gates. Yet everything inside him had shifted. He had stood on the edge of something he couldn't fully name, something that had brushed past his life and left its shadow behind. He didn't talk about it publicly. He couldn't. How do you explain to millions of people that a single moment of instinct may have changed the course of a night and possibly many lives? Instead, Michael turned inward. He began waking before dawn, sitting by the window with a cup of tea he rarely drank, watching the sky change colors. The quiet helped him breathe. The quiet reminded him he was still here. His team tried to keep things normal. Rehearsals resumed. Meetings filled the hours. But there was a new layer of caution in everything they did. The routes changed. The rooms changed. The faces around him felt different, more watchful, more serious. And Michael felt something he had never felt before on tour: vulnerability. Not the emotional vulnerability he poured into songs. A physical one, a human one, the awareness that life could vanish between one heartbeat and the next. One evening, after rehearsal, he sat alone on the edge of the stage. The empty arena echoed with his thoughts. Bill Bray joined him quietly. "You okay, boss?" Michael nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "I keep thinking about the crowd." Bill tilted his head. "What about them?" Michael's voice softened. "They came to hear music, to forget their problems. And for a moment, they were part of something they didn't even know about." Bill sat beside him. "You did what you were supposed to do." Michael shook his head. "I don't think I did it because I was supposed to. I think I did it because my heart wouldn't let me ignore it." That night, he wrote in a notebook he carried with him, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is listen to the voice that scares you." A week later, he returned to the stage. The opening night back was sold out. As the lights rose and the crowd's roar poured over him, Michael felt his knees weaken for a second. The memory of Wembley flashed through his mind, the stillness, the pointing, the silence. Then he inhaled, and he stepped forward. The music began. From the outside, it looked like the same Michael Jackson show the world had always known. Powerful, electric, unforgettable. But inside Michael, every note carried a new meaning. Every smile felt borrowed. Every dance step felt precious. Every cheer sounded like a gift. After the encore, he stood in the darkness behind the curtain, listening to the crowd chant his name. He pressed his palm to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, not to them, but to the moment that had allowed him to still be there. Later that night, in his hotel room, the phone rang. It was Catherine. "I saw the footage," she said. "You scared me." Michael's voice was gentle. "I scare myself too." They talked for a long time. About life, about childhood, about how close everything feels sometimes. Before they hung up, Catherine said something that stayed with him. God whispers before he shouts. Michael stared at the ceiling after the call ended. He thought about the whisper he had heard that night on stage. Not a sound, not a thought, but a knowing. Weeks passed. The press moved on. New stories replaced the old ones. The world forgot the interruption. Michael didn't. At a small charity visit in Paris, a little boy tugged on his jacket and said, "My dad says you stopped the show once because you felt something bad." Michael knelt. Sometimes your heart tells you what your eyes can't see. The boy nodded, as if that made perfect sense. That same evening, Michael walked along the river alone. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered stars. He stopped at the railing and closed his eyes. He thought of all the moments in life that hinge on the smallest decisions. A step taken, a word spoken, a pause made when everything in the world tells you to continue. He whispered, "Thank you for stopping me," not knowing who he was thanking, not needing to, because what mattered most was this. He was alive, and he intended to keep listening. But the real emotional cost of that night would only reveal itself when Michael returned home and faced a memory he could no longer outrun. When Michael finally returned home after the tour, the silence of Neverland felt heavier than any stadium he had ever filled. The gates closed behind him with a familiar echo, but something inside him remained open, a door he could not shut. He wandered the halls at night, passing the framed photos, the gold records, the laughter that still seemed to live in the walls. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he was back on that stage, pointing, shouting, feeling the world stop beneath his feet. One evening, he sat alone in the theater room and watched the Wembley footage for the first time. He didn't recognize the man on the screen at first. The Michael in the video looked fierce, unafraid, commanding. But inside himself, he remembered the truth. He had been terrified. He turned the screen off before the woman was removed from the crowd. He didn't want to relive that part. Catherine noticed a change in him. "You don't sleep," she said one night as they shared tea in the kitchen. Michael stared into his cup. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her hands." Catherine reached across the table and took his fingers. "You saved a lot of people that night." Michael shook his head. "I don't know that. I only know what I felt." "That's enough," Catherine said. But it didn't feel like enough to Michael. Weeks later, a quiet envelope arrived at Neverland. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You were right." Nothing more. Michael sat with that note for a long time. He asked Bill Bray about the case. It had been sealed. The woman was gone. The others connected to the incident had disappeared from the news. The world had moved on, but Michael hadn't. He began writing more. Not songs, reflections. He wrote about fear, about intuition, about how life can change in 1 second without warning. One entry read, "If I had ignored that feeling, I would have walked straight into something I couldn't escape." How many people walk into danger every day because they don't listen to themselves? Another night he wrote, "We think we control everything, but sometimes the only control we have is whether we stop when our soul says stop." Months passed. Michael resumed recording, but something had shifted in his work. The songs carried a new quiet beneath the rhythm, a vulnerability that even he didn't fully understand. One afternoon, during a break in the studio, a dancer approached him. "Michael, I was at Wembley that night." Michael looked up. The dancer hesitated. "I just wanted to say thank you. I had my little sister in the front row. If anything had happened..." His voice trailed off. Michael nodded. "I'm glad you're both safe." That night, Michael walked outside and stood under the stars, thinking about all the lives he would never meet, all the outcomes that would never exist because one moment had gone differently. He whispered into the darkness, "I hope I did the right thing." The wind moved through the trees as if answering. From that night on, Michael trusted his instincts more than ever. He changed routines. He questioned decisions. He listened when something inside him tightened for no reason. He told a friend once, "The world is louder than the heart, but the heart knows first." Years later, when people asked him about the strangest moment he had ever experienced on stage, he would smile and say only, "The night the music stopped." They never knew how close the world had come to a very different ending. And Michael carried that knowledge quietly for the rest of his life. Because sometimes survival doesn't look like victory. It looks like memory. Years passed. The world kept changing, as it always does. New songs rose on the charts, new stars took the stage, new stories filled the headlines. But for Michael, that night at Wembley never became just another memory. It lived inside him, not loudly, not dramatically, but like a steady pulse beneath everything else. Whenever he stepped onto a stage after that, there was a brief moment, right before the lights came up, when he closed his eyes and listened, not to the crowd, not to the band, but to himself. He had learned something the hard way. Intuition is not fear, it is awareness. And awareness, when respected, becomes protection. Michael began speaking about it quietly to those closest to him. Not about the woman, not about the investigation, but about the feeling. The body knows before the mind, he told a dancer once while stretching before rehearsal. If you ever feel that tightening in your chest for no reason, stop. Listen to it. Some nodded, some didn't understand. But Michael never forgot. At Neverland, he started spending more time with the children who visited. He sat on the grass with them, asked them what scared them, what made them happy, what made them feel safe. One boy said, "I feel safe when my mom listens to me." Michael smiled. That's a good place to feel safe. Another said, "I feel safe when I don't have to pretend." Michael's smile faded, but his eyes softened. He wrote in his journal that night, "If more people listened to themselves, the world would be quieter and kinder." As his life moved forward, the memory of that night shaped him in subtle ways. He became gentler with himself, less willing to push through exhaustion just because the world expected him to, more protective of the people around him, more willing to say no. Sometimes late at night, he would sit at the piano and play soft, unfinished melodies that never became songs. They were not meant for the world. They were meant to keep his heart calm. One evening, Catherine joined him on the piano bench. "You still think about it," she said. Michael nodded. "Every day." "Does it frighten you?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "No, it reminds me I'm alive." She took his hand. That's not a bad reminder. Years later, a letter arrived at Neverland from a woman in London. She wrote that she had been in the front row that night with her teenage son, that when the show stopped, her son had squeezed her hand and whispered, "Mom, something bad almost happened, didn't it?" She wrote, "We still talk about that night, not because of the fear, but because of the way you protected people without ever telling them you did." Michael folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same notebook where he kept his quiet thoughts. As he grew older, he carried that awareness with him into every rehearsal, every conversation, every decision. It made him more human, more fragile, and somehow more at peace. When he spoke to young performers, he told them, "Talent can make you famous, but listening to yourself can save your life." He never explained why. He didn't need to, because some truths are meant to be carried, not announced. On one of his final tours, standing alone behind the curtain, Michael felt the same tightening in his chest. Not from danger this time, but from gratitude. He pressed his hand over his heart and whispered, "Thank you." No one heard him, but he meant it, for the moment of instinct, for the life that continued, for the people who went home safely that night without knowing why, for the quiet knowledge that love and awareness can exist even in the loudest places on earth. As the curtain lifted and the crowd's roar washed over him, Michael stepped into the light, not as a man he once was, but as someone who understood something deeper about being alive. And when the music began, it carried not only rhythm and sound, but the silent echo of a night when everything stopped and everything was saved. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Michael Jackson. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Michael Jackson. This story resonates because it captures one of the most unsettling and rarely discussed human experiences, the moment when instinct intervenes between life and irreversible consequence. At its heart, the narrative is not about danger itself, but about the fragile space between awareness and catastrophe, and how a single human decision can quietly reshape many lives. Michael's reaction on stage becomes powerful not because it is dramatic, but because it is instinctive. He does not pause to calculate consequences, to manage optics, or to preserve image. He acts from something older than logic, the internal alarm that has kept human beings alive long before language existed. That is what gives the story its emotional gravity. In a world driven by performance, Michael stops performing. He chooses being human over being perfect. What makes this especially affecting is that the audience never understands what he has done for them. They leave the stadium thinking of music, excitement, maybe confusion. They do not leave with gratitude, because they never knew what almost happened. And Michael accepts that. He carries the burden of the knowledge alone. This silent responsibility becomes one of the story's most haunting elements. Heroism without recognition is far heavier than heroism with applause, and Michael embraces it without complaint. Emotionally, the story explores the loneliness of intuition. When something inside us knows the truth before the world does, we stand alone with it. Michael experiences this isolation deeply. The moment on stage freezes not only the crowd, but his inner world. He sees something no one else does, and for several seconds, the future of thousands of people rests entirely on whether he trusts himself. That psychological tension is immense. The reader feels it because it is universally relatable. Everyone has experienced moments when a quiet inner voice contradicts everything happening around them. After that night, the narrative shifts from external danger to internal transformation. Michael does not simply move on. He becomes more reflective, more careful, more attuned to his own humanity. The experience cracks something open in him, not with fear, but with awareness. He begins listening to himself more. He protects his boundaries more fiercely. He values stillness, silence, and presence in ways that fame had previously stolen from him. The emotional power of the story lies in its aftermath. We do not remain in the adrenaline of the incident. Instead, we watch the echo of that moment ripple through Michael's life. This is psychologically true. Traumatic or near-traumatic experiences rarely explode and then vanish. They sink inward. They change how a person sees the world, how they sleep, how they breathe, how they love. Michael's vulnerability becomes especially moving because he is someone the world expects to be invincible. Yet the story strips away the myth. It shows a man who goes home and cannot escape the memory, who replays hands and movements in his mind, who struggles to sleep, who carries invisible weight. That humanizes him more than any performance ever could. The relationship with his mother adds another layer of emotional authenticity. Catherine becomes a grounding presence, not with solutions, but with understanding. Her line, that sometimes God whispers before he shouts, frames the entire story. It suggests that intuition is not random or irrational, but something sacred. Whether one believes in God or not, the message remains. There are forces inside us that deserve our trust. The letter that arrives later, "You were right," is one of the most emotionally loaded moments of the narrative. It is devastating in its simplicity. No explanation, no details, just confirmation. This forces the reader to confront the weight of what Michael prevented without ever being shown the specifics. The mind fills the silence with its own fears, which makes the moment far more powerful than explicit description ever could. Another essential emotional dimension is Michael's evolving relationship with fear. At first, fear grips him. Later, fear becomes a teacher. He does not become paranoid. He becomes present. He stops ignoring himself. He begins protecting others with a calm awareness that grows from experience rather than anxiety. This transition reflects real emotional growth. Fear is transformed into wisdom. What makes the ending particularly moving is that the story never seeks sensational closure. There is no dramatic revelation to the public, no awards, no headlines declaring him a hero. Instead, the conclusion is quiet. Michael steps onto later stages with a deeper gratitude for being alive. He whispers, "Thank you," not to the crowd, but to the moment that allowed him to still exist. That whisper becomes the emotional thesis of the entire narrative. The story also touches on a universal truth. Sometimes the most important moment of our lives are the ones no one else sees. And the people who carry those moments carry them alone. This is why Michael's experience lingers in the reader's mind. He becomes a mirror for our own hidden battles. The times we trusted ourselves, the times we ignored ourselves, the times a decision quietly saved us or someone else without fanfare. Ultimately, The story does not ask the reader to admire Michael's fame. It asks the reader to recognize Michael's humanity. It reframes him not as an icon on a stage, but as a man navigating the same invisible emotional currents as everyone else. Fear, intuition, doubt, responsibility, gratitude. The quiet legacy of that night is not safety. It is awareness. It is the idea that life is always balanced on small moments of listening. The story leaves us with the unsettling, beautiful realization that survival is not always loud. Sometimes there's a whisper in the chest, a pause in the music, a decision no one applauds, and a life that continues because of it. That is why the story stays with us. Because long after the music fades, what remains is a fragile miracle of being here at all.